Hello, Canada, and welcome to another episode of The Maple Pill. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever, and I'd love to hear what are you guys currently following in today's news cycle. Jump in the comment section. Let me know what's piquing your interest. But I figured we'd start off today's show with, I don't know, it's not really a riddle. It's more of just a question or maybe really just an observation. We're going to jump deeper into it later on in the show. But do you know what the difference is between the Taliban and the Canadian truckers? Yeah, that's right. The Canadian government will only negotiate with one of those groups. They'll only negotiate with the Taliban. It's interesting times we find ourselves here in Canada. That honestly, when I was doing today's story roundup, and there's an article from Maclean's that we'll be covering in the Black Pill section, and I realized that literally we're comfortable negotiating with the Taliban, recognizing their government in Afghanistan. However, thankfully, Justin Trudeau draws the line at Canadian truckers who peacefully protest, because they'd like their freedoms and rights back. But anyways, this is going to be another typical episode, or typical at least of this week, where the first half of this show, we're going to be focused on updates around the truckers and what's going on there. Also, I've got a clip from Brian Peckford. Reminder, I've been trying to get you guys, begging you guys at this point in time to go watch the interview with I'm drawing a blank now, with Jordan Peterson. If you guys haven't watched that, you can go back and watch yesterday's show or the show before that. And essentially, please go watch that podcast. I think it's extremely important. We're going to start off today's show with just a couple minute clip of Brian speaking at a recent protest. I believe it was in BC, where he essentially was talking about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I think when I compare what Brian's saying to the narrative I'm seeing in the mainstream media, there's obviously two wildly different interpretations about what that charter represented. And you know what? I'm going to trust the guy that actually signed it, that was the Premier of Newfoundland at the time of signing, versus what experts are going to tell us in regards to what's a reasonable restriction on our rights during a pandemic. But anyways, let's jump into it because we've got a lot to cover today. Hope you guys are doing well. And first things first, let's listen to this speech from Brian Peckford. This is courtesy of the Puget Sound Radio. And so I've actually sped it up here just 1.5 because I want to, I think we're going to listen to the entire clip. It's a really important clip, guys. Please don't skip over this if you're watching the replay of this video. Because again, I think that many Canadians are misinformed, and it's the mainstream media and the politicians that are purposely misinforming you in regards to what the Charter of Rights and Freedoms says.
That's why in 1981 we brought in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which wasn't passed by the Prime Minister. It was passed by 9 provinces and the Prime Minister. It's a national document that applies to everyone here today and everyone all over Canada. So understand, except for the creation of the country in 1867, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is by far the most important document in the history of our country, since we were a country. It is the most important one, because it applies to you and me equally. Yeah. Every individual on this planet is unique. Like every snowflake is unique, every individual is unique. And therefore, when you get a document which says that I have these freedoms and I have these rights, that means every single one of us, from the Fino to Iqaluit to Bonavista to the Niagara Peninsula, every Canadian is equal and has equal rights before the law. Section 2 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, what does it say? It says you have freedom of expression, you have freedom of conscience, you have freedom of religion, you have freedom of expression, and you have freedom of the press. What else does it say? It says you have freedom to associate. You have freedom to assemble. And in Section 6 it says you have the right to travel anywhere in this nation, anytime. And you even have the freedom to leave this country if you so want. But most importantly, for a lot of people who now see this, it also says in Section 6, you have the right to pursue a livelihood anywhere in this country. You have the right to pursue a livelihood anywhere in this country, and they are taking the jobs away, inside the government and outside the government, and threatening others of their jobs. And then number 7 says, Section 7 says, you have the right, listen to this one, to life, liberty, as Dr. Lagasse talked about, and Dr. Hoff talked about. And you also have the right to your security of the person. Nobody is allowed to touch you unless you agree. And And then Section 15 says, to top it all off, we weren't satisfied with those three. We topped it off by saying every person in Canada is equal before the law. You're just as equal as Justin Trudeau. You're just as equal as John Horgan. You're just as equal as Adrian Dixon. By then, you're really just as equal as Bonnie Henry. You don't have to take a back seat to anybody. No. You have your rights and your freedoms as an individual. This business of group rights and this business of lobby group rights and all the rest of it completely disguises your rights as an individual. And we got to be very careful going forward that we don't lose these rights to these groups, that they take over and dominate the government of British Columbia or the government of any province. You must remain steadfast. That as an individual, you come first. The groups come second that you form with. And that's very important for any democracy anywhere in the world. When the individual gets submerged by a group or something else, that's the beginning of the decline of our democracy. Yeah. So those four sections of the Constitution and of the Charter of Rights are absolutely sacrosanct, okay? And then we've got people out there who are trying to say to me and to others, I don't know if they think.
You know what? I'm going to pause it there. We're going to come back to this video and watch the second clip once we get to an article where essentially what Brian does in this next part is really just counterbalance the mainstream media's narrative and their experts in regards to, oh no, we're not infringing upon your rights. This isn't illegal whatsoever. Again, I'm so happy that we've got someone like Brian Peckford that's fighting on behalf of all Canadians, that is taking this to court. And I can't imagine a better spokesperson. And I really appreciate his impassioned speech here. Again, as always, links in the video description down below to everything we're going to be discussing today. But now let's get into some of the trucker roundups and updates. So again, as I've been saying throughout this week, I think True North has some of the best coverage, especially when it comes to just kind of rounding up what's going on with the trucker protest. So again, link in the video description down below if you want to see how day 11 of the trucker protest went. Moving on, though, post-millennial, breaking Canadian Freedom Convoy GoFundMe under review after raising over $10 million. So this is concerning. And definitely there's a lot of pressure on GoFundMe to pause things, to look into it, to disband this GoFundMe. Now, there are alternative ways for you guys to donate. I'll leave it up to you guys to go find those alternative ways. As well, there right now is a group of Canadian and probably international Bitcoiners that are raising sats. So you can also donate sats directly. And it's being led by guys like BT Sessions and Greg Foss, and a couple other well-renowned Canadian Bitcoiners. So personally, I trust them. So again, if you're looking to or preferred to donate via sats or Bitcoin, again, that's another great alternative. But picking up from the post-millennial article here, this fundraiser is currently paused and under review to ensure it complies with our terms of service and applicable laws and regulations. Our team is working 24/7 and doing all we can to protect both organizers and donors. Thank you for your patience. The statement on the page reads. Now, again, to me, this is telling, right? If the regime has to go to these extents to apply pressures on GoFundMe in order to pause the donations, right? And I understand they'd raised $10 million up until this point in time. I think that if all of a sudden this gets disbanded, right, the way it works is if they do cancel GoFundMe, the individuals that donated their money receive it back. I imagine that we're going to find other ways to donate, right? Whether it's through Bitcoin, whether it's through, is it like Go Give Send or something like that? I know it's a popular GoFundMe alternative. Again, I trust that no matter what, this is going to continue. And when you hear some of the leaders of the Freedom Convoy talking about this, again, it sounds like they're determined regardless of what happens to these funds. And I think it's important we understand that Canadians are backing them, right? The government wouldn't be stepping in. GoFundMe wouldn't be stopping this if this was a fringe minority. It's because this is truly a grassroots mass movement occurring here in Canada that's sparking all sorts of other movements across the world at this point in time, right? We covered it yesterday, but there's a sympathy protest or like a similar protest going on from California to Washington, D.C. They had over 100 and I believe 40,000 members in a Facebook group, and that Facebook group immediately got deleted. Right? Big tech, the censors, the mainstream corporate press, legacy media, and the governments of the world, they're nervous about this. They're nervous about people actually realizing, oh shit, this whole system only works if we work. And if we choose not to, we actually control the power. And I know that a lot of people have pointed out on social media the irony that, you know, a lot of left-leaning individuals, a lot of Marxists, a lot of communists are literally watching blue-collar people unite right? The workers of the world are literally uniting, and they're fighting it, and they're promoting the fascism, the tyranny that we're currently experiencing. But continuing on talking about the truckers and the GoFundMe. So this is from the Toronto Sun. First, GoFundMe puts hold on truckers' cash. Now in comes lawyers. So again, understand that the trucker convoy, they've got lawyers that are going to be fighting on their behalf in order to make sure those funds do get released and get used for the purpose that it was originally intended for. Organizers say the push to stop the money raised for truckers is more of a political bump in the road. And I just want to highlight this. It may be the second largest ever Canadian fundraising effort on the site, but GoFundMe has stopped taking in or paying out Freedom Convoy donations. Again, that's to date. There's a good chance that this could have eventually evolved into the largest fundraiser on GoFundMe for Canadians. So this isn't, regardless of what mainstream media tries to tell us, this is a big deal, and this is something all Canadians should be proud of. From CBC, MPs vote to call GoFundMe to testify at Commons Committee on convoy protest. Now, we're going to get into this a little bit later on in another story, but there was an issue with environmental groups in Alberta where Jason Kenney called them out about whether they were receiving foreign funds. I don't remember the Liberal Party stepping in and asking for an inquiry there, right? To me, a democracy, a society, a country like Canada only works if laws are equally applied to all individuals. And right now we can see that the current regime really is focused on just trying to nail one subset of the population that disagrees with them and their perspective. So again, link to this article in the video description down below if you guys want to dive a bit deeper into it. But let's just listen to the very beginning of what Alistair McGregor here called for. This is on the SECU committee. And essentially, he's asking GoFundMe to answer questions. And I'll leave it up to you guys, but this just seems so freaking disingenuous that I don't know how they're not embarrassed to use this language at this point in time.
Is going to be as follows: that the committee invite representatives from GoFundMe to appear as soon as possible to answer questions regarding security measures the company has in place to ensure the funds are not being used to promote extremism, white supremacy, anti-Semitism, and other forms of hate, which have been expressed among prominent organizers for the truck convoy currently in Ottawa, including A, how the company prevents the use of anonymity to funnel money to extremist groups, B, what measures are in place to prevent foreign...
So understand, essentially, what he's implying here is that the trucker convoy is an extremist group.
...funds from being used to support these views, and to the subgroups that have expressed an intent to put in place their own undemocratic government, and C, what measures and assurances are in place to ensure the $1 million that has already been released is not going towards promoting any of the forms of the aforementioned unacceptable views and activities.
I just love how they're doubling down on the narrative of unacceptable views. But again, if you guys want to watch the full video, it's in the description. Now, this is from CTV News. Convoy organizers determined to stay thank Ottawa residents for support. So I've seen on both sides of the equation. If you guys go into Reddit, and I think we know what Reddit is this day and age, but essentially you'll hear all these people crying afoul, asking for sympathy or demanding results from the Ottawa Police Services or the Ottawa Mayor, saying that their lives are being turned into hell this last week because of the honking. Well, I can sympathize with it. Probably is an inconvenience, and it probably is a disturbance, and it probably would be nicer if you didn't have to listen to that honking. You know what would be even nicer? If all Canadians just got their freedoms and rights back, right? Or if we had a time machine and we could go back 18 months and actually get all the lost time, right? All the lost jobs, all the lost businesses, all the lost GDP and revenue. And so while I understand that it certainly would be an inconvenience to a certain extent to residents of Ottawa, I personally don't have the level of sympathy that they're currently asking for. I want to go back to the way we were, right? I want to be back in 2019. And it's wild that this is considered a radical or extremist view at this point in time. But from this article, some of the main organizers of the Freedom Convoy decried Thursday that they had been painted as racist, misogynist, and even terrorists, and that no one from the federal or provincial governments had met with them. And again, reminder, we're going to get this into the black pill story, but the Canadian government is willing to send representatives to sit down and interact with the Taliban in Afghanistan, but they will not interact with a convoy of truckers in their own country. We're willing to essentially grandstand and demand Ukrainians not have their freedoms infringed upon by Russians. But again, the Canadian government, the federal government in particular, they've got no interest in interacting with their own citizenships and opening up a dialogue about what freedoms and rights we should have, right? Fundamental rights. Direct quote here from the article, and this is from Lich, who's one of the founders. We want to thank the hundreds of residents of Ottawa who have stepped forward to show us support, provided accommodations, food, and just plain friendship to members of our convoy, she said. This level of community is what Canada is all about. Also speaking at the press conference was Daniel Bulford, a former RCMP officer who quit over the service's vaccine mandate. Bulford said he has seen truckers and supporters of the movement feeding the homeless, picking up trash on the streets, shoveling snow at and guarding the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and the Terry Fox Memorial statue. So again, I think it's important to understand that once a couple of the bad actors, and again, I think when we're looking at tens of thousands of people, to see the sort of outrages that occurred during the first day of protest, really all things compared, right? I showed you that photo yesterday of what happened at Golden Corral in the United States when there was only one steak left and literally a fist fight broke out, a massive fist fight, throwing chairs and shit like that. All things considered, this seems like a pretty darn peaceful protest here in Canada that's going on. And it's just so disingenuous to see people calling them extremists, right? And trying to freeze their GoFundMe funds. And I just wanted to highlight, this is anecdotal, but this is just a tweet I saw making the rounds on social media. And it's from Tracy Wilson. As an Ottawa resident, it's so bizarre watching things unfold. Local news, city council, and all the end of days chaos and call in the army. But my mom's group on Facebook are baking muffins, making sandwiches, sharing videos of singing protesters, and doing truck crafts. Right? I think that they're actually getting a lot more support than the mainstream media is letting on. And then Trudeau, Ottawa residents need their lives back, won't commit to negotiations with truckers. Again, this honestly, at this point in time, I have no doubt that Trudeau's backed himself into a corner where his ego will never allow him to come to terms or come to a table and sit down with the truckers. And he's only going to double down on his rhetoric. He's only going to double down on calling them racist, sexist, and every other mean name he can think of or label to apply to them, in the hopes that just people won't do their due diligence. They won't trust their own eyes. They'll simply trust the prime minister. So again, I'm so frustrated. I'm so fed up with it at this point in time. Also just wanted to highlight, Blacklocks has a great article on the government seeking the protest hearings. So again, link in the video description down below, but we've got a lot to cover today, so I'm going to keep rolling. This clip is making the rounds. So the suspect sought in Tomb of the Unknown Soldier desecration. Now, to the best of my knowledge, the desecration here is that she dances on the tomb. Again, very distasteful. Honestly, I haven't seen anyone state whether this is an actual crime or anything like that. Maybe it is. Maybe it's considered that. But like, again, if this is one of the worst faults of the protesters, is this clip here where she's yelling and essentially she stood up on it for a split second there. Doesn't seem that wild. Doesn't seem that crazy to me. Again, I'm not going to say that I justify it or I think it was a smart idea for her to do that. But to make her out to be some ne'er-do-well, right, I think is also a stretch of interpretation. Now, CBC, UCP denies reports of rural caucus negotiating with blockade protesters after lanes opened in good faith. Again, they've got a very thorough article here, but I'm going to actually jump over to the Western Standard, which I found to actually cover this more thoroughly, I think painted in a slightly different light. Source says UCP MLAs told to stall for time over ending COVID restrictions, but Health Minister Jason Copping contracted Harrison and Nixon and said the vaccine passport program was effective and not going away anytime soon, sources said. And so here's a quote. Government House Leader Jason Nixon and Premier's Office staffer Brock Harrison gave MLAs their talking points on how to handle questions from the public. A UCP MLA tells the Western Standard, speaking on conditions of anonymity. And so it's important here to understand that again, if we don't hold these MLAs, if we don't hold our MPs accountable or our MPPs, no one will. So that's why yesterday I was telling you, you need to write in and you need to send emails. You need to call senators in regards to Bill C-10 and C-11. As well, we need to do the same thing here when it comes to vaccine mandates, lockdowns, and all that other crazy silliness, honestly, at this point in time, because as we've already discussed a handful of different times, and now it's starting to finally get picked up in the mainstream media, there is that John Hopkins University study, meta-analysis, that essentially says, oh yeah, I guess lockdowns and all those other mandates, they're really not all that effective. This is from Canada News Media. Canada will not use troops against truckers. Blockade, more protests planned. Now, again, if you want to get blackpilled on this, you can really listen to Trudeau's language. And he essentially says it's not on the table at this point. So, again, I think he's leaving himself some wiggle room. But the only area he's not going to leave himself wiggle room is when it comes to actually negotiating with his fellow citizens. I just want to highlight this from Global News. Home hardware sign in Strathroy, Ontario expresses support for trucker protests. So again, this is another way that we can create common knowledge, right? As game theory dictates that, hey, we're not okay with what's going on, or hey, I also support the truckers. So if you own a small business, if you have a social media account, if you just have a large group of friends, now is the time to be having these conversations. You know, send them my videos, right? And ask them to poke holes in the information that I'm sharing here, right? I'm open to changing my mind, unlike our prime minister, unlike a lot of the mainstream corporate press, legacy media, unlike a lot of the experts that are only focused on their talking points rather than focused on exploring and discovering the truth. It's the same reason that we see so many people bashing Joe Rogan. How dare he actually want to explore the truth and get to the bottom of things rather than simply accepting whatever the experts, the government puts on a pedestal tell us. And again, I just want to give a shout out to the home hardware in Strathroy because sadly, in this day and age, that is bold and brave for a business to be willing to come out and do this when we live in cancel culture. And I think that they need to receive props. They need to be supported. So again, those of you that are in Strathroy that are real estate investors that maybe follow me from other endeavors, go show them some love, right? Maybe next time when you're debating between them and another big box store, why not use that home hardware? This is from the Toronto Sun. Farm tractor convoy supporting truckers planned from Alexandria to Ottawa. So one of the organizers estimates that it's likely 100 tractors or more will participate. And so this is another thing that I see being obfuscated a lot in the mainstream media, where they're saying like, oh, the protest is losing momentum. Sure, there might be a couple more people come this weekend, but it's going to be no big deal. I don't believe that's the case, right? And the trucker convoy communities that I'm following and tracking on social media and Telegram and things of that nature, it certainly seems like there's a lot of people planning to show up this weekend. You know, I also received unverified reports, but it sounds like there's a convoy coming from Aylmer into Sarnia to lock down or shut down that border crossing as well. It sounds like there's multiple different blockades now occurring in Alberta, in addition to the Coots one that we covered in yesterday's episode. So again, I don't think by any stretch of the imagination, this movement has lost its momentum. In fact, I think as we continue to see other protests sparking up around the world, as we continue to see arguably consequences from these protests occurring, right? Consequences like O'Toole having to step down. Consequences like Jason Kenney getting his caucus a bit ruffled, right? It seems like he's starting to have a lot of pressure applied to him if you guys are following what's going on in that regards. Again, this is good. This is important. There needs to be consequences to what's happened over these last 2 years. And then I just thought I'd share this little video. So I assume most truckers are already aware of this, but in case you're a trucker and you're at a protest and you really want to dig your heels in, or maybe you just want to know more about your trucks, here's a handy little tip.
Hey, to all my Aussie truck drivers, this is just a helpful tip. If you do have to leave your truck somewhere and you don't want a record driver to be able to move it, make sure you go to your air chambers and you take the caging bolts with you. Take them home with you, because there's no way the fucking record drivers that the government calls is going to have thousands of these. And without these, if you take your supply line off your air chamber, no one's moving that fucking truck. I don't care what they have, because the wheels won't turn and there's no way they'll be able to stop you. G'day, mates. So hey, to all my Aussie truck drivers.
There's a low pro tip from an Australian truck driver. I'm assuming it works the same here in Canada. I definitely don't know much about transport trucks, but if you guys know differently, let me know in the comment section. But thought that might be useful just in case anyone needed that sort of tip. And then I wanted to highlight this from Spencer Fernando. And again, really encourage you guys to go check out this entire article. But essentially, he's highlighting in this article, or I'll just read the title. Here's what the establishment, media, and Trudeau government doesn't want you to see. Essentially, he's just showcasing, protesters of every color and stripe, although my photos aren't loading for whatever reason right now, but protesters of all colors and stripes that are participating, supporting, and promoting the trucker protests. So again, despite the fact that our prime minister, the mainstream media, they all want to frame this as simply a fringe minority of racists, it's the exact opposite. And it literally just shows how little they respect us. And again, that definitely pisses me off, and I truly believe it should piss you off as well. But let's switch into the first blue pill story of the day. Milk prices soar across Canada as record price increases for farmers kick in. This is courtesy of Global News. So steep price increases, which took effect at many grocery stores on Tuesday, are as high as 15% in some provinces and coincide with a spike in the price farmers are paid for the milk they produce. So again, remember how like less than a year ago, we were all told we were crazy if we thought inflation was more than transitory? Yeah. Continuing on from the article here, let me get that off the screen. Continuing on from the article, the Canadian Dairy Commission announced in November that farmers would receive an 8.4% increase to the price they're paid for the milk they make beginning February 1st. This is the largest annual increase in history and nearly twice the previous record. But again, inflation ain't no big deal. The price increase is meant to offset rising costs for dairy farmers, especially feed costs, which the commission said have gone up by as much as 30% over the past 2 years. The commission said the price hike is also meant to give farmers a chance to recuperate some of the higher costs associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. So one, understand that if farmers are getting paid 8.4% more, but their costs went up 30% more, they're still being squeezed. And that means that likely we're going to continue to see more price increases down the road because eventually they're going to need to make that up or they're going to choose to stop making milk, right? No one wants to run their business at a deficit indefinitely. Again, if you guys want to dive deeper into it, link in the video description down below. But continuing on, this is from CBC News. So right now, Premier Moe in Saskatchewan, he seems to be the only even close to voice of reason, in my opinion. And so, of course, the mainstream media have him in their sights and they're taking aim at him. Why experts say Premier Moe's claim vaccines no longer protect against COVID-19 is based on misunderstandings. So I really do encourage you guys to go read this entire article and let me know if you come to a different conclusion than me. But I just want to focus on one piece here, which is about transmission. So the Omicron variant increased infectiousness means that the immunity provided by vaccinations isn't as powerful as it was during the Delta-driven fourth wave in Saskatchewan. But that doesn't mean it isn't working, as stated by Premier Scott Moe. And essentially what Premier Scott Moe said was, hey, it doesn't stop transmission. And again, it doesn't. Direct quote here, it has moderate effectiveness, and that is pretty solid. It's much better than some of the other vaccines that we give routinely, said their expert, Muhajirin. And so my first question for him is, what vaccines are we giving out that are even less effective than the COVID-19 vaccine? Maybe we should be looking into those vaccines as well. And why can't you state any of those vaccines in this nice little presser where you're pushing against Premier Moe? And then they go on to source some studies that have been done in the U.S. by the Center for Disease Control have showed that a booster shot actually increases protection against infection all the way up to about 60 to 70%, depending upon the study, Rasmussen said. So again, my first question is so some studies show as high as 70%. But this doesn't actually stop transmission. And there's a reasonable argument to be made when you've got a leaky vaccine. And that's what we've got with this, right? There's two types of vaccines, a perfect vaccine and a leaky vaccine. And with a leaky vaccine, people can actually be infected and not realize it. And that can actually up transmission versus reducing transmission. So again, I don't actually see the smoking gun or the silver bullet that destroys what Premier Moe was saying in his press release. They also point out that he didn't even have a health official with him when he was making the statement. As if having some random dude dressed in a lab coat all of a sudden gives you such a greater footing to stand upon, right? Yeah, I don't know. Whenever I see Fauci, I just can't help but think Fauci lies, but that's just me. But continuing on, another blue pill here. So this is from the Canadian Press. Environmental groups serve Alberta Premier government with defamation lawsuit. And this is kind of interesting. I wasn't aware of it until I read through this article, so I encourage you guys to check it out if you're interested. But essentially, one of the things he claimed was that, hey, these groups are receiving money from foreigners in order to shut down oil pipelines. And it turns out, well, they did receive about $3.5 million from foreigners. And again, this is where like the focus right now on the Trucker Convoy, the Freedom Convoy protest, and saying like they might be receiving money from foreigners. Yeah, a lot of organizations too do. And I don't see why that inherently makes it wrong or evil. Again, that doesn't mean that you can't go into an investigation about it. But what's interesting here is essentially they're suing him with a defamation lawsuit over literally things that were less divisive and less aggressive than what our prime minister said. Just going to leave that there. But it'll be curious to see how this all plays out. Because if Jason Kenney's found at fault here, I can't help but wonder whether Justin Trudeau and some of his minions won't also be found at fault. Maybe there's a difference between provincial and federal courts when it comes to these things. But really interesting, because I would argue there's absolutely a case for defamation. If there is one against Jason Kenney in this case, it feels like there certainly would be for Justin Trudeau in the current situation going on with the Trucker Convoy. Another one from the Canadian Press. Online streaming bill covers streaming giants, promotes Canadian content. So I'm not going to read you guys the mainstream media's narrative here, but the argument essentially is like, it helps promote Canadian content and the heritage minister and this, that, and the other. We're going to get deeper into it in the Black Pill story later on. But essentially what I want to highlight here is we've already discussed this in past episodes, but the CBC, which receives over $1 billion a year from the Canadian government, and we also give over $600 million in funding to other Canadian news organizations. The CBC has one top 30 show, and that's I forget what it is now, but it was a show I've never even heard of, to be honest. But I don't watch mainstream TV and stuff like that. But essentially, this idea that, oh, we need to regulate, and the way you make good Canadian content is by forcing regulations that stop competition. I would argue it's the exact opposite, right? When you allow free competition to come in, it's going to force Canadian content creators to step up their game rather than simply sitting back on their laurels and knowing that the government will dole out money to them or force competitors outside of the market. Continuing on, National Post. We've already covered this a bunch, so I'm not going to get deep into it here, but you guys should go watch yesterday's video or the previous day's video. But it's nice to finally see the mainstream media picking up news that we've been talking about for a couple days now. Lockdowns only reduce COVID deaths by 0.2%, Johns Hopkins study finds. So, again, this is an important thing, and yet they're barely getting any coverage. And Zero Hedge here had a highlight from Steve Watson via Summit News, talking about an interview that Tucker Carlson did with one of the people from the study. And, like, there's some really damning points here to be made. So let's make them. Appearing on Tucker Carlson's show Wednesday, Johns Hopkins professor of surgery, Dr. Martin Makary, blasted the college, noting Johns Hopkins itself did not even put out a press release about this study. And if you look at the media coverage, it's one of the biggest stories in the world today. And yet certain media outlets have not even covered it. The professor dug down into the study and noted that it found that the number of lives saved by the lockdowns is infinitesimal compared to those lost through missed cancer diagnosis and treatments. He added, I think the public is hungry for honesty and basic humility from public health officials. I know I am. I'm fucking really hungry for humility from the elites, the self-appointed elites as well. Senator Rand Paul also referred to the new Johns Hopkins study in an appearance Wednesday, noting, I hope we'll learn from this study. There are no correlation between any of the mandates the government put in place and any change in the incidence of the disease. Paul reminded viewers that Anthony Fauci has repeatedly claimed that lockdowns have saved millions of lives. And it hasn't. Literally, this meta-analysis study says that it's a couple 100,000 at best. It's become so politicized that I don't think Dr. Fauci will ever apologize or admit to the country, But we need to have people like him removed from office because they've been so wrong on so much policy, Paul urged. 100% agree with Rand Paul on this. This is not him grandstanding. This is him making some extremely valid points. And the sooner we get rid of these silly policies that we now know are not effective, that don't make a big impact, the better. And then one more blue pill here for you guys. So 1/3 of Canadians say they have a lot in common with Freedom Convoy protesters. So I'm just curious, does that mean 1/3 of Canadians are racist now? And I'm joking there. But clearly a good number of people share frustrations with the seemingly endless pandemic and the measures that are making life uncomfortable, and also really don't do shit, right? As we discussed just in the previous article there. But continuing on, this one's from True North. BC admits that half of COVID hospitalizations aren't because of COVID. And this really tells you where we're at this point in time, where I consider this a blue pill story, where I'm like, I'm pretty sure we all realize now that all the hospitals inflated their COVID case numbers, right? And inflated the COVID deaths. And finally, now we're starting to talk about deaths from COVID and with COVID. And it is nice to see them fessing up to a certain degree. But at the same time, how are we not seeing these drastically impact policy, right? That's the really frustrating thing about this moment in time, is they'll admit to us that like, oh yeah, maybe we were wrong about this, or oh yeah, it turns out that there weren't as many people that died from COVID. It turns out a lot of them just died with COVID, but let's keep all the same policies in place regardless. One more story here. Blue pill, and then we'll move on to some red pills. This is from CBC. CN won't pursue contempt charges over Gitsan rail blockade in northern BC. And so I don't know if you guys remember, but back in 2020, there was all these different railway blockades, right, from Indigenous people, First Nations people, essentially protesting over land rights and access and things of that nature. And Canadian National Railway says it will not be pursuing contempt charges against a dozen people, including 3 hereditary chiefs who were arrested for blocking a major rail in solidarity with Wet'suwet'en opponents of the Coastal GasLink pipeline in northwestern BC in February 2020. So the only reason I want to highlight this here isn't because, hey, I think those people should be in jail or they should be charged or anything like that. But again, it is interesting to see the media focusing so hard on the trucker protests and saying that they're being treated with kitty gloves versus Indigenous people, when in fact, again, these people, like in this exact story, they'd received already court orders, right, and court injunctions stating that they weren't to continue protesting in the manner they were, and they continued to ignore those. Where right now, we technically don't have that yet in regards to the truckers. And what we're hearing from the politicians as well as the media is just like, we need to move faster. We need to stop this immediately. And understand, this also had significant impacts to the supply chain, right? We also move a lot of freight by rail car in addition to trucks. But enough blue pills. Let's move on to a red pill. This is from Better Dwelling. Canada's real estate bubble has grown over 800% faster than U.S. home prices. Yeah. Canadian real estate prices grew nearly 2 times the next G7 country. So here's a quick little chart. You can easily spot Canada. We then got the US, UK, Germany, France, Japan, and Italy. And it's wild to actually see it in comparison. But what's even crazier is when we actually look at this chart, G7 Real Home Price Index, the inflation-adjusted index price of homes across G7 from 2005, or starting in 2005, and 2005 essentially equals 100. So look at this point in time, 2005 here in Canada. This looks like some of my NFT projects here, where just literally number go up economics, but this is completely unsustainable. At the same time, I don't see the government changing monetary policy, so I think somehow this is going to continue. Like, we're literally at that point in time where it's like the Wile E. Coyote, right? When he's chasing the Roadrunner and he's off the cliff. But if he just keeps running, maybe he can make it to the other side before he realizes there's nothing beneath him. That's pretty much the Canadian real estate market right now. But don't worry, home prices could sink 20% when speculative fever breaks, says OSFI. And this is from BNN Bloomberg. Their logic here isn't wrong, but their assumption that the Canadian government and central bankers will actually ease or pull back on the crazy monetary policy we're currently experiencing, that's where I find fault. So property prices in Canada are set to fall as rising interest rates bring an end to speculative fever in the housing market, the country's banking regulator said on a podcast. Now, again, I don't believe that they're actually going to have the balls to raise rates enough to impact housing prices and the speculation we're currently seeing in the real estate market. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, your opinions. Let me know in the comment section down below. But rolling on, this is from Rebel News. House of Commons Ethics Committee wants to stop cell phone data collection. I'm not sure if you guys saw this, but Trudeau got called out on it in the Commons today. And essentially, he was just like, well, the Conservatives are focused on, this isn't his exact word, so I'm paraphrasing here, but essentially like on misinformation and emotions, we're focused on data. And so we need access to this data, but it's been depersonalized. Yeah, when have we heard that before, right? That governments, particularly we can look to our U.S. neighbors, that they're only going to access the information when they need it, or it's going to be depersonalized. And then it turns out years later, there's like a huge WikiLeaks, and we find out, oh no, our bad, actually, we were accessing and managing your data the entire time. And, you know, this isn't just the Conservative Party now. This is the Ethics Committee calling them out on it. Tam essentially said she wouldn't appear before them. So again, like they're going to have to subpoena her in order to get her in front of the Ethics Committee to actually talk about them accessing this data. And honestly, like at times it feels like Trudeau's gaslighting here, saying that he worked with the ethics commissioner and that everyone was aware of this and they've been transparent since 2020. I don't believe it. Do you guys remember being told back in 2020 this was all going down? Yeah, I don't. And then continuing on, if you didn't see, Trudeau announced he would recuse himself as his wife steps in to be a volunteer. And while I encourage you guys to read this article, I just thought it was a great reminder to bring up the We Charity scandal. Remember that? Again, you probably don't, or you probably misremember it because mainstream media did such a bad job of covering it. But let me remind you, the Prime Minister recusal under the Conflict of Interest Act followed his approval of a $43.5 million federal grant to We Charity in 2020, only weeks after the group gave Mrs. Trudeau an expense-paid trip to London, England. Mrs. Trudeau attended a March 4th, 2020 We Charity rally in London at a just under $20,000 cost. The Prime Minister approved the grant at a May 22nd May 22nd cabinet meeting. I didn't even know about it, Trudeau later testified to the Commons Finance Committee. Cabinet denied favoritism in announcing the We Charity grant June 26, 2020. It's important that we be able to work with an organization, then Youth Minister Bardish Chadger told reporters at the time. What about a perceived conflict of interest, asked a reporter. I have confidence, said Chagger. I'm curious how that is not a conflict of interest, asked a reporter. We Charity is an organization that works with 2.4 million young people across the country, replied Chagger. Subsequent disclosures showed We Charity paid a total of $471,751 in talent fees, free trips, and expenses to the Prime Minister's wife, brother, and mother. The $43.5 million grant was withdrawn. Minister Chagger was subsequently dropped from cabinet, and then Finance Minister Bill Monroe abruptly resigned August 17th, 2020. On disclosures, he also endorsed the contractor's grant. Without disclosing, We Charity hired his daughter out of college and hosted his family on $41,366 expense-paid trips to Kenya and Ecuador. Now, again, this honestly, in my opinion, is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to government grift and the favoritism showed. And to these people, there's nothing even wrong with this. Like, they deserve these all expensive paid trips. They deserve to have their children hired by the companies or the organizations they give out tons of taxpayer money to. That's the world and the reality these people live in. And if we don't hold them accountable, it only continues to get worse. And another one from Blacklocks here. Bank has credibility gap. Yeah, no shit. At this point in time, I'm starting to wonder, maybe we've got some followers here that are actually in politics that watch the Maple Pill, because this literally sounds like it could have came out of my mouth, some of these quotes. So Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem yesterday faced pointed criticism over inaccurate inflation forecasting. The bank has a credibility gap on the rising cost of living, the Senate Banking Committee was told. You missed the mark, said Senator Elizabeth Marshall from Newfoundland and Labrador, a former provincial auditor. Marshall noted the bank repeatedly claimed rising costs would be transitory. Inflation is now expected to run above the bank's own targets into 2023. When you were talking about inflation, you were using the term transitory, and then you started stepping back when the realization hit that it wasn't going to be transitory, said Senator Marshall. It was going to be a little bit longer. There were people in the Senate who actually thought it wasn't transitory, even though we may not be economists. So it was no longer transitory. Then Governor Stephen Pelosi, in testimony last May 18th at the Commons Finance Committee, repeatedly downplayed the inflation risk. This is not inflation, said Pelosi. This is normalization of prices. And this shit drives me crazy, where they just start creating new buzz terms to essentially describe what you're asking them about. But like, it's like the gain of function with Fauci, right? No, you don't understand. This isn't the definition of gain of function. No, motherfucker, it is. And this inflation is more than transitory. And it's so frustrating that they feel so comfortable lying to our faces in the hopes that the mainstream corporate press legacy media won't hold them accountable. Continuing on in the article, the inflation we're observing right now is very likely to be transitory, said Pelosi. That is transitory rise in prices. Pelosi last June 3rd predicted persistent downward pressure on inflation. On November 17th, he forecast inflation will stay low. We're literally at 30-year all-time high right now with inflation in Canada, right? And now they're starting to adjust, and they're like, oh, by like the end of 2024, it'll probably go back to normal. It's not, because we'll never change our monetary policy. So barring like an economic depression, in which case, again, I think we're going to see pressures that will still drive inflation to a certain extent. This is all bullshit. And I don't know, don't you guys just get tired of them lying to you sometimes? One final quote here. Yes, we do expect inflation is going to remain uncomfortably high in the first half of the year before it comes down fairly quickly in the second half as the pandemic recedes and things normalize, said Macklem. This is obviously uncertain, or there is obviously uncertainty around that. Again, this is fucking bullshit, right? This is worth less than a penny at this point in time. Continuing down the red pill, though, Pelosi warns U.S. Olympians not to speak out against Chinese abuses while in Beijing. So, yeah, just because they use slave labor, just because they might be, essentially removing an entire Uyghur population off the face of the earth, ain't no big deal. You don't want to ruffle feathers at the Olympics. Am I right? Switching, though, now into the black pill. I know sometimes it's hard to tell when I'm red-pilled and black-pilled. I barely understand the difference at this point in time as well. This is from Timcast. Not sure if you guys saw, but Biden administration announces death of ISIS leader following raid in Syria. And so I saw a few tweets from some people in the administration saying, mission success. Well, civil defense group, the White Helmet, said on Twitter that 13 people had died, including 4 women and 6 children. That seems great. Now let's get back to where we started off the conversation at the start of the show here, talking about how our government is willing to essentially negotiate or interact with the Taliban, but refuses to negotiate with Canadian truckers. This is from Maclean's. How the world is legitimizing the Taliban. Every political engagement and dollar spent in Afghanistan brings an internationally sanctioned terrorist organization one step closer to unofficial recognition. Yup. From the article, 2 very different viewpoints emerged from meetings between Western officials and top leaders of the Taliban last week in Oslo, Norway. From the European and American perspective, the meetings were in no way a legitimization of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. The repeated attempts to make that point clear became almost comical over the 3 days of meetings, culminating in near farcical speeches at the UN Security Council, where everyone from the Secretary General Antonio Guterres to Canada's former ambassador to Afghanistan and current United Nations Special Representative Deborah Lyons seemed to bend over backwards to explain why it was necessary to engage with an internationally sanctioned terrorist organization. It's all about saving lives, you see, but more on that in a bit. Again, unfortunately, I don't got time to read the entire article to you guys, but think about that. Again, we were more than comfortable to essentially put the Taliban in a situation where they are going to start to become unofficially recognized as the government of Afghanistan, but we dare not interact with those Canadian truckers from that fringe minority. From the article, the Taliban, meanwhile, glided through the week with an air of fait accompli, not unlike they did during their negotiations with the U.S. over a peace deal to end the war in Afghanistan. Like them, they were now being told that they would get everything they wanted without having to make any concrete promises and returns. That's how we treat real terrorists. But when it comes to, domestic protesters, that's a line in the sand that our prime minister is not willing to cross. Yeah. Now, this is from Matt Tabibi's Substack. I really encourage you guys go give him a follow and read through it. I'm just going to highlight this here, but TK mashup, the lab leak conspiracy theory, not man-made or genetically modified. They cried in unison until they didn't. So essentially, I'll just leave it to you guys to read through this. But also, if you got family members that are constantly telling you you're too black-pilled, you're a conspiracy theorist, like, oh, you're wrong about everything, this is a nice little handy article just to maybe not rub their noses in, but be like, hey, why don't you check this out? And do you remember how you were all calling me crazy when I was saying it was a lab leak, a couple of years ago? Yeah. I wonder what else might in a couple of years from now go from being misinformation or lies or untruths to like, oh yeah, of course that was true. Maybe things like cloth masks not being effective. Maybe things like lockdowns and mandates not being effective. Maybe things like deaths from and with COVID being actually astronomically different and important in order for us to understand, in order to decide how policy actually rolls out. So here's one, this article really pisses me off, and we'll jump back to Brian Peckford's speech in a second, but do vaccine mandates violate Canadians' charter rights? And essentially, they bend over backwards in this article to bring in experts that say, it's unclear, and it's probably not. So mandates offer a choice, receive or decline the vaccine. Those who decline are instead presented with a different set of options. No, we're not presented with a different set of options. This isn't like going to a restaurant and asking for the vegan menu. This is completely different, guys. Just being like, oh, we're just going to ostracize you from all of society and make your life miserable and almost impossible until you conform, until you obey, until you give in. That's not presenting us with a different set of options. And it's so disingenuous to pretend otherwise. And honestly, like, this sort of yellow journalism, like, they should be so embarrassed to put this shit out. And yet again, it just shows how little they respect us. And then Section 1 of the Charter says, all of the rights and freedoms in the Charter are subject to such reasonable limits as can be demonstrably, and that's my emphasis, justified in a free and democratic society, said Milne. What that means is that there is this kind of proportional, reasonable approach that governments can actually limit people's rights so long as they have a very good reason and can demonstrate why. Well, can you demonstrate that lockdowns actually work? Because that metadata analysis that we were talking about for this entire freaking week seems to argue differently. A global pandemic might just be one of those reasons. Again, they start off as if like, no, it's not a violation of your rights. And then we constantly see this wiggle room language seeping in. But they can only go so far as to what a minimally impairing of the right. Stopping people from going to a restaurant might be considered minimally impairing when the consequences are further spread of a highly contagious virus. No, it's not. And particularly when you're forcing people out of their jobs, when you're forcing them out of their professions and their careers. And in the conclusions, although vaccine mandates may have an impact on charter rights, whether it is an illegal infringement on those rights is unlikely. I completely disagree. A lot of other Canadians disagree. But let's listen to the only guy that's actually still alive that actually signed that Charter of Rights. The one that's actually suing the government because he believes it is a violation.
We don't know the difference. That somehow Section 1 of the Constitution, I know it's cool, I know it's getting evening, but you got to listen to this. Somehow that Section 1 forgives the government. And that they can go ahead and override those other 4 sections I just mentioned. I got news for them. There are 4 tests that have to be met. Well, first of all, that section 1 doesn't even apply to our circumstance, because when we wrote that section, the whole idea was this, that the only way you could override these sacrosanct rights and freedoms of individuals was if there was a dire situation in the country, like war or insurrection. A virus from which 99% recover is no war and no insurrection. And then if you tried to, even if you tried to make it, if you tried to squeeze it to apply, if you tried to bend it to make it try to apply to this circumstance, what did you have to do? You had to do 4 things. Number 1, justify it? No, that wasn't heavy enough. Demonstrably justify what you're doing. Okay? Okay, is that all? No. You have to demonstrably justify that by law. That meant a new law, not the existing laws that they're using. New circumstance means new law. Where's the new law? They never went to the Parliament. They never went to the provincial assemblies to get a new law. They tried to use the existing law. They skirted around the Charter of Rights and Freedoms by law. Number 3, using reasonable limits. And number 4, you had to do all of those other 3. But remember, it had to be done in a way that was consistent with a free and democratic society. What they're doing is not consistent with any free or democratic society. It's more consistent with a totalitarian society. So don't be fooled by those who try to tell you that somehow you can skirt around the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I was there, I helped write the damn thing, and they're wrong, and we're right. We didn't wait from 1867 to 1981 to now 2021 to see all of our rights suddenly wiped out for callous and powerful reasons by those who forget from whence they came. Ours is a country worth fighting for. Listen to me, I was 7 years old before I became a Canadian. I wasn't born a Canadian, but I can tell you right now, I'm a Canadian now, and I want to defend what we've had and what we know we can continue to have in this country. And you and me are not going to take a back seat to all those who are trying to somehow excuse what happened. We're not going to take a back seat to these people. We're going to stand next beside them or above them and tell them that we want a prosperous, secure, and free Canada for the future, for our children and for our grandchildren, and you have no right to try to steal that away from us. From Tofino to Iqaluit to Bonavista to Niagara Peninsula, we must become united as Canadians, as free Canadians, understanding our history, understanding the history of our planet, and put that all in context for tomorrow, so that we can be a proud, free country in the northern part of North America. We're not going away, Mr. Horgan. We're not going away, Mr. Trudeau. We're going to stand and be counted and to make sure that we restore the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which everybody fought so hard to get. Stay around. Thank you for coming.
God damn, that speech fires me up. Oh. Somehow I froze. Well, shit. Can you guys still see me? I look froze on my end. If someone can let me know in the comments if you guys can still hear and see me, because it appears that I've frozen, that would be great. I have no idea why that happened. That is unfortunate. All right. Well, we're going to keep rolling here under the assumption that you guys can still hear and see me. Again, okay. We can still hear and see. Awesome. Okay. Excellent. Well, I'm going to keep rolling, guys. I appreciate you guys hanging here, even though it's getting a little bit slow or frozen. So where were we? So continuing down the black pills here, essentially, I just want to highlight that, again, I completely disagree with this interpretation that they have at CTV News, and I encourage you guys to read the whole article as well as go back and rewatch Brian Peckford's episode. Let's see if I can switch my camera and whether that... Okay, so I'm back here, but I'm still frozen there. Wonderful. All right, well, we're going to jump between these two. So the next black pill I just want to share with you guys, this is from the Seattle Times. COVID testing company fake test results, lied to patients, Washington lawsuit says. So an Illinois-based coronavirus testing company with at least 13 sites in Washington faked or delayed test results or provided none at all, lied to patients, and failed to properly store test samples, according to a lawsuit filed Monday by Washington State Attorney General Bob Ferguson. Again, link in the video description down below to everything I'm going to share with you guys. So I encourage you guys to go check it out. The next one here, this is from Michael Geist. Not ready for prime time. Why Bill C-11 leaves the door open to CRTC regulation of user-generated content. And honestly, this article is worth reading every aspect of, but we're just going to quickly cover a couple main points here that I hope will cause you guys to want to dive deeper into it. So the bill continues with a new section 4.2, which gives the CRTC the instructions for creating those regulations. The result is a legislative pretzel where the government twists itself around trying to regulate certain content. In particular, it says the CRTC can create regulations that treat content uploaded to social media services as programs by considering three factors: whether the program that is uploaded to a social media service directly or indirectly generates revenue, which automatically means that just about any piece of content, say, for example, I do, does, or it's going to force content creators and people that post on social media to completely opt out monetization. If the program has been broadcast by a broadcast undertaking that is either licensed or registered with the CRTC, if the program has been assigned a unique identifier under an international standard system. So again, I really encourage you guys to go read this entire article, but I just want to cover one other point from it. So, second, in addition to the continued regulation of some internet content as programs under CRTC rules, the remarkable scope of the bill also remains unchanged. Readers may recall an internal government memo that identified a wide range of targets for Bill C-10 regulation. In fact, the memo noted that the bill could cover podcast apps such as Stitcher and Pocket Cast, audiobook services such as Audible, home workout apps, adult websites, sports streaming services such as MLB TV and DAZN, niche video services such as BritBox, and even news sites such as the BBC and CPAC. The potential scope for regulation is virtually limitless, since any audible visual service anywhere with Canadian subscribers or users is caught by the rules. Bill C-11 maintains the same approach with no specific thresholds or guidance. In other words, the entire audio-visual world is fair game, and it will be up to the CRTC to decide whether to exempt some services from regulation. So again, this is such a broad set of policy here that like we all need to make our voices heard, that this is unacceptable, that this is essentially going to be one more nail in the coffin of free speech in Canada. The next thing here is from Brownstone Institute. Is this our World War I? And this is really a worthwhile article to read, but I just want to highlight a couple pieces from it. Finally, our mainstream media has self-immolated on a fire of derangement syndrome and an attempt to chase ratings and clicks by sowing fear for 2 years. CNN has relentlessly broadcast an unhinged message of terror and despair, noting every grim milestone when deaths or cases passed a certain point. Like the doctors of Med Twitter, and this is essentially just referring to doctors on Twitter, Med Twitter, it has amplified bad news and rare complications. The self-destruction of Europe in 1914, like our own, is notable for more than its pathos. It has real consequences. When a terrifying new threat emerged in Germany in 1933, cynical and exhausted Europeans kept their distance, adopting a policy of appeasement in response. Once the Second World War was on, and reports began to emerge of what the Germans were doing to the Jews in Eastern Europe, many people shrugged it off. After all, they had sent their sons and brothers off to die in 1914, in part because the media had lured and fabricated stories about German soldiers doing unspeakable things to women and children in Belgium. And so when the next biological threat emerges, as it inevitably will anyone listen to the warnings that will issue from the scientific institutions, from the TV doctors, from the media? I know I will not. And yeah, I think that that's a very powerful analogy there. Like any analogy, it's not going to be perfect, but it's really worth thinking about. Next Black Pill story here. Illinois governor gave $300,000 of federal relief funding to Black Lives Matter. The president of the Lake County chapter of BLM was charged with felony battery of a police officer at the beginning of 2021. I really, if you guys aren't following along this, but you have an interest, it really seems like the ball of wax is falling apart now in regards to BLM. It turns out there's a lot of money that was donated that can't be traced or can't be figured out what it was used towards. Seems like a lot of government officials inappropriately passed funds along to BLM and things of that nature. Again, really worth doing a deep dive on, and link in the video description down below. Enough Black Pill, though. Let's jump on to the Clown Pill story of the day. And yes, I understand this is actually from the Beaverton, which is a parody newspaper, but I'm down for this. Let's actually just make this reality. Aaron O'Toole ousted to make way for new CPC leader, this fuck Trudeau flag. Yeah, I'm on board. Let's vote that fuck Trudeau flag into power. Let's go. Then moving on, the white pill for today, essentially just touching upon what's going on in Saskatchewan. So again, I really like what I'm seeing coming from Premier Mo. Again, at the same time, I wish we would have never found ourselves in this situation to begin with, but here we are. And so at least he seems to be the premier that's pushing the envelope on opening things up. He seems to be the one moving the fastest. He seems to be the one that's just talking with the most authenticity and honesty. At this point in time, that's all I want, is for people to be truthful, or at least try and be truthful and seek truth, rather than constantly focusing on just the narrative, right? The narrative they wish to present to us. So I won't take too long on this, but again, there's lots of great links talking about what's going on in Saskatchewan in the video description down below. I encourage you guys to go do that. But I didn't want to leave that as your only white pill of the day. So the other white pill is reminder at my website, mattmckeever.com. You can click the ebook section, and we literally have a free e-guide on how to get started in Bitcoin. If you click the e-guide and then scroll to the top, you can literally read it right there. And essentially, just want to let you guys know, if you don't follow the price of Bitcoin, it's been on sale for the last couple of weeks. So I think now's a great time to start stacking sats or getting into Bitcoin if you've been sleeping on it up until this point in time. So again, encourage you guys, go check out mattmckeever.com. And finally, let's leave you guys with the meme of the day. And this one is a Matt McKeever original. So I'm pretty proud of this meme. And you guys can find it on my Twitter. I also shared it on my IG account. Let's just bring it up here so it's a little bit bigger for you. So, Daddy, tell us again what happened in the third year of the Great Reset. Well, Atlas shrugged. It was the great honking. Purple-haired NPCs foamed at the mouth. There were psyops and false flags everywhere. The Prime Minister called them every name he could think of. But those beautiful truckers just kept honking. And that's why we no longer have to wear masks or show our papers to participate in society. Fucking legend. And yeah, the truckers are actually fucking legends in my opinion. Regardless of how this plays out, just the fact that they were willing to stand up and speak out, and they were willing to actually put something at risk, right? They're risking their reputations because they're being called every mean name you can think of from both politicians as well as the mainstream corporate press, legacy media. And in addition to that, they're risking their jobs. They're risking their current incomes, right? They're risking being arrested or fined. And I just want to say again, how much I appreciate them fighting on behalf of every Canadian's right for freedoms. And again, I encourage you guys, if you've been on the sidelines, if you've been scared to speak out or stand up, now's the time to do so. And again, don't believe the mainstream media narrative that this is dissipating out, or because the GoFundMe is locked or anything like that, that this is going to disappear. I'm hearing from lots of people that didn't participate last weekend that they plan on going this weekend, or they plan on going to their local provincial legislator offices, right? Or they're going to start writing politicians. Again, whatever you can do to create common knowledge that we're not okay with this, that, hey, you're not alone. That was the whole point behind me creating the Maple Pill in the first place. So again, I really appreciate those of you guys that engage with this content, that share it on social media, that smash that like button. So let's quickly jump into the chat and see what everyone's saying. Again, appreciate everyone that engages with it, because the algorithm's going to do us no favors. But those of you that do leave comments, those of you that do share it on social media, it does help. And reminder, if you hate watching this show on big corporate tech, I don't blame you. You can go watch the replays on Rumble. So again, just look up Matt McKeever Unfiltered and you'll find the Maple Pill there. We've got Peter, appreciate Peter. Benjamin's there. The Taliban comparison, yeah, I thought that was pretty good. Project LB52. Benjamin says, time to put some braids into that majestic beard of yours. You know what's funny? I literally looked at it today on camera, and for whatever reason, it seemed like it grew a couple inches. I was like, holy shit, this is getting long. I'm going to need to figure out what I'm doing with it. So maybe it is time to learn how to braid, or get someone that can. Jessica Lynn Perrin says, yes, what leader responds in such a way? 100% agree. Kyle says, yo, hey, what's up, Kyle? Aislinn says, hey. Graham says, I called the MP for this region 2 times and sent 3 emails over the past 6 days. Today, I got a form letter back that didn't answer any of my questions. Next time, I'll email harder. Well, again, I still appreciate it. Maybe eventually, if enough of us do so, it'll hit a tipping point and create some awareness there. Because it certainly seems like, at least for some politicians, it does matter what their constituents think of them. Matt P says, I'm confused. Are you a communistic sleazeball, or are you for the convoy? I'll be honest, Matt, if you can't figure that out based upon this show, one of us isn't the sharpest tool in the shed. Gloria says, to achieve world government, it is necessary to remove from the minds of men their individualism, loyalty to family traditions, national patriotism, and religious dogmas. Brock Adams, UN. Yep, that's a scary quote and completely accurate. It's when they isolate us, it's when they divide us, it's when they make us feel alone that we're at our weakest point. And that's why communities, that's why, having strong family bonds, having good social groups, right? Both online as well as in person. It's not just enough, in my opinion, to simply have some good friends or bros on the internet. You need to start focusing on building personal relationships locally, particularly if things ever get to the point where shit hits the fan or the economy continues to crumble. We've talked at length here about the shortage economy as they're starting to frame now the supply chain issues that we're experiencing. It's important. No man is an island unto himself. And so even regardless of how rich you are, if bad times are ahead of us, you're going to need allies. And this is the time to build those relationships, as well as it's just personally gratifying. But if you need no other reason than simply to do it because it's going to piss off the government and the world elites, that's a good reason, in my opinion. George says, mainstream media, please don't use me or mine to prop up your lies. Vax Pass is a yellow star, in my honest opinion. Yeah, I don't disagree with you. It's a very slippery slope. And if it's not that, it's certainly the gateway towards social credit scores, right? I've got no goddamn interest in that. In 2009, Pfizer paid $20 million to 4,500 U.S. doctors for consulting and speaking on its behalf, New York Times. I really appreciate you, Gloria, sharing your sources as well, because I think that always adds a little bit more weight. The life of a nation is secure only while the nation is honest, truthful, and virtuous. Frederick Douglass, yeah, he was a badass, and definitely some great quotes from him. Lisa saying, nope. George is saying, you don't want to ruffle 1 billion people from a 4,000-year culture loaded up with military if you can peacefully avoid it. Yeah, and I'm not even sure, I'm assuming that's in regards to the Taliban and stuff like that. And, the main point I was trying to make is the dichotomy of how the government reacts to its own citizens versus, foreign nationals. And I think that tells us everything we need to know. Lisa says, go Brian. Absolutely, guys. Again, I think Brian deserves all your support because while I haven't seen a lot of hit pieces on him yet, I only imagine that the mainstream media right now, they're sharpening their knives. They're getting ready with their pitchforks. So they will absolutely be coming for him. Again, I apologize about it freezing. I honestly don't know what causes that. If any of you guys are more technically oriented than me, let me know what I'm doing wrong. It seems like it's only happened twice. We're on episode 19. So not terrible, but also I don't like the fact that 10% of the time I seem to freeze midstream. That is a concerning ratio in my opinion, but I'm glad you guys could at least hear me. And yeah, we just roll with the punches here again because to me, the production values here, I want to constantly be upping them on the Maple Pill, but it's more important that I try and get this information out, that I try and create common knowledge as game theory would dictate, because I just want you guys to know you're not alone. And it's okay to question the mainstream narrative. And it's okay to want to do your own research. And it's absolutely okay to want to make your own medical decisions. And you should try and become as informed as possible in order to make the right decision for you and your personal situation. Anyways, that's enough. I know I kind of went over time on this episode, but really appreciate those of you that tagged along. Those of you that have gone and checked Jordan Peterson's interview with Brian Peckford. Awesome. Those of you that haven't, you know what your homework is for tonight or this weekend. Appreciate you guys. I'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And yeah, I just appreciate the fact that I'm not alone and that I've got you guys here with me while we go through the Maple Pill, which is the blue pill, the red pill, the black pill, the clown pill, and the white pill. And don't forget that last pill. That's the most important pill, is trying to focus on what you can control, what you can improve upon, how you can build a more resilient, robust lifestyle. And again, it really does start with community. It starts with building parallel institutions. It starts with rejecting the lies. So I appreciate the fact that you guys are seeking truth, just like me. And I'll see you tomorrow. Cheers.